Our keynote speaker, there's no words that can explain just how much of an impact he's had in India. Mr. Prashant Bhushan is a senior advocate in the Indian Supreme Court, and also a senior member of Team Anna, which supports Anna Hazare in his anti-corruption campaign. Mr. Bhushan has argued over 500 public interest litigation cases. In November 1984, Mr. Bhushan was present in Delhi and personally saw the carnage that took place against the Sikh community. He, along with a group of other Supreme Court lawyers, helped rescue several Sikh families who had been trapped by the mobs. The car Mr. Bhushan was driving at the time was also attacked and stoned. Mr. Bhushan is currently a key senior advisor in the Anna Hazare campaign and a strong advocate for greater judicial accountability and an end to corruption. The topic of Mr. Bhushan's talk tonight will be Human Rights, a Threat to One is a Threat to All. Please help me in welcoming Prashant Bhushan.
All the distinguished ladies and gentlemen present here, and friends and activists of the World Sikh Organization. It's indeed a great honor for me to be invited to deliver this address at the annual parliamentary dinner of the WSO. I have come to talk about the human rights situation in India. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the situation, but there may be many who are misled by the government's propaganda on what's really going on in India. The Indian government and our Prime Minister never tire of boasting about how they have increased the rate of GDP growth in India in the last 2 decades, since the period of economic liberalization or structural adjustment, as it is known. But if you look at what has happened in the last 20 years and where we stand today in terms of the state of human rights of the vast majority of the people in the country, we get a very different picture. If you look at socio-economic rights of the people and you ask the question, what percentage of the Indian population is able to get 2 square meals, basic health services, basic education, and a roof over their head? The answer would be not even 20%. 4 years ago, the Arjun Sen Gupta Committee report, sponsored by the Indian government, found that 77% of India's population lives on less than 20 rupees a day, which is less than 40 cents a day. That's not enough to get even 2 square meals. What to say of healthcare, education, or a roof over their heads? Several studies done in the recent past have found that 47% of India's children are malnourished. More than half of the world's malnourished children live in India today. India has twice the percentage of malnourished children than even sub-Saharan Africa. And it's not that the situation has improved in the last 20 years since the period of economic liberalization. The situation has just deteriorated. in terms of the Human Development Index, which measures the country's well-being in terms of access of the people to basic health care, basic education, food, etc., India is continuously sliding behind. And it has gone behind even countries like Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka in terms of the Human Development Index. And yet, the Prime Minister and the government keep boasting about the rate of GDP growth. Is there any relationship between this high rate of GDP growth which we have witnessed in the last 10, 12 years and the worsening condition of the common people of the country? I believe there is, because in a very large measure, this high rate of GDP growth has been achieved by selling off our natural national wealth and handing it over to private corporations for commercial exploitation, whether it is minerals, whether it is land, whether it is forests, or even the assets of public sector corporations. On a very large scale, we have witnessed during these last 2 decades a very large scale transfer of public assets, common property resources, natural resources from public to private hands, which have been allowed to be sold off or even exported out of India. They are not even being used in India. More than half of the iron ore that is being extracted from the country is now being exported out of India, mostly to China. Now, while that exploitation, the digging up and the selling of iron ore will certainly add to the rate of GDP growth, but what does it do to the lives of the common people of this country? In the first place, most of this mineral wealth is in forests which are habited by tribal people. So first you have to displace those tribal people. Then you have to cut the forests, destroy the water sources, pollute the waters, pollute the air, and what does it get the country? So far as the country is concerned, we do not even get 1% of that value of that wealth by way of royalty. Justice Santosh Hegde, the Lokayukt of Karnataka, did a study and gave a report on the iron ore mining going on in Karnataka, and he found that while this ore is being exported to China for 5,000 rupees a ton, what the country was getting from it was just a royalty at the rate of 27 rupees a ton. The cost of extraction of that ore was about 300 rupees a ton. The cost of transportation to the port was another 300 rupees a ton, which meant that more than 4,000 rupees a ton was just the profits being made by these mining corporations, a large part of which was being shared with various public servants at all levels, right from the chief minister downwards by way of bribes. And the rest of it was just going to fatten the bank balances or fatten the assets of these mining barons who have become a mafia in the country, which has become a very serious threat to India's democracy. And what did the people get out of it? A large number of these tribal people got displaced, and when they fought or they resisted their displacement from their traditional lands and forests, which was their only means of livelihood, they were faced with lathis and bullets, as a result of which they were left with only 2 options: either to go away and starve to death, being deprived of their only source of livelihood, or to pick up arms and join the Maoists and fight with them. against the state which was doing this to them. And a lot of them, or many of them, opted to pick up arms and join the Maoists and have been fighting with them. As a result of which, the Prime Minister and the Government of India states that the Maoists have become the single greatest security threat to the country. But who has created the security threat? It's the government itself because of these policies. These kinds of policies have created huge incentives for corruption, as a result of which corruption in India, instead of decreasing during the period of economic liberalization, has grown by leaps and bounds, and every other day or every third day we are seeing new scandals erupting which are worth literally lakhs of crores. Every other day we have reached a situation where just about 10 days ago we have had to file a charge sheet against 15 cabinet ministers, 15 of the most powerful cabinet ministers in this cabinet. That's half the cabinet and the most influential half of the cabinet, which includes the Prime Minister. And these charges have not been made by us. They are made on the basis of CAG reports, on the basis of orders of the High Courts and the Supreme Court, on the basis of other unimpeachable documents. And what are we asking for? We are saying that this is a very serious matter, that you have a cabinet which is running the country where half of the most influential ministers in this cabinet are facing such serious charges of corruption. And therefore they need to be investigated and taken to their logical end. But who will investigate them? Which investigative agency is going to investigate these charges of corruption against 15 of the senior-most cabinet ministers? All the investigative agencies currently in India, including the CBI, are controlled by the same government which needs to be investigated, controlled by the same ministers who need to be investigated. Therefore, how will they credibly or independently investigate them? And that is why this campaign for an independent anti-corruption investigative agency called the Lokpal was started. That in accordance with the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, India needs an anti-corruption ombudsman which is completely independent of the government and which is empowered to investigate charges of corruption against all public servants, whether it is politicians or the bureaucracy or judges or anybody else. Unfortunately, despite an enormous public upsurge in support of this campaign, the government has not yet yielded and given the country or provided such an independent anti-corruption ombudsman. If we look at the civil and political rights situation in India, I was talking about socio-economic rights and its relationship with corruption. But if we look at the situation regarding civil and political rights, we find that though there was this absolutely horrendous genocide of the Sikhs in 1984, and a equally horrendous genocide of Muslims in Gujarat in 2002, hardly anyone responsible for those acts of genocide have been brought to book. We are now 28 years from the Sikh genocide, 10 years from the Gujarat genocide, but the criminal justice system in India has been unable to address this problem. And and it's not just this. There have been any number of encounter killings. Mr. Jaswant Singh Khalra, who was here with you in 1995, had documented 2,000 unrecorded cremations which had taken place in just 3 cremation grounds of Punjab by the police. Obviously, people who were just picked up and killed and who were just shown as disappeared. And this has happened in Kashmir on a very large scale, and nobody has been held accountable. We had done a People's Tribunal on the manner in which the investigations of terror offenses have been done in India, in Hyderabad in August 2008. I was also in that jury, and we came out with a report which showed that in most of these terror investigations, large number of innocent Muslims in recent years have been picked up, arrested, tortured by the police, and framed in totally false cases. The result is that they spend more than a decade in fighting those cases in court. At the end of a decade or 2 decades, many of them come to be acquitted, but by that time, their lives have been completely destroyed. Their lives and their families' lives have been destroyed. And unfortunately, even when the court records a finding while acquitting them that they were deliberately framed by fabricating evidence against them by the police, no police officer is held accountable or hardly ever held accountable. So this has bred a culture of impunity among the police forces and those people who are in charge of the ruling establishment in the country. Just as there is an impunity about corruption, people or public servants who are today looting the country, who are plundering the wealth of the country, are doing so with the full knowledge that there is nobody, no institution which is going to hold them to account. And that is why this loot and plunder and this gross violation of human rights is continuing. We know what is needed to fix this. We need an anti-corruption and a completely independent anti-corruption ombudsman. We need to fix the judicial system in the country, which has virtually collapsed. It is dysfunctional, it is thoroughly corrupted, it is certainly independent of the government, the judiciary in India, but it is totally unaccountable, as a result of which there is enormous corruption in the judiciary, and the judiciary just doesn't deliver because the cases go on interminably for decades altogether, and very often come to be decided wrongly due to incompetence or for extraneous considerations. So the judicial system certainly needs very, very drastic reforms and fixing. We know what needs to be done, but there is no political will to do it, because those who are in charge of the ruling establishment in the country are very happy to have a failed, non-functional judicial system which will not hold them to account. So, we need to fix the human rights organizations in the country, or the human rights commissions in the country, which were set up as independent bodies which would independently look at human rights abuses done by the police or public officials. But unfortunately, these human rights institutions have also failed. And the main reason is that the government is appointing weak and pliable people to these posts, because the power of appointment is still exclusively vested with the government. Not just the power of appointment, but the power of removal as well. They waited for 1 year to appoint Justice Balakrishnan, the former Chief Justice of India, as the chairman of the National Human Rights Commission. Why? Because he is a thoroughly corrupt gentleman. We have filed a complaint against him detailing a large number of charges of corruption. He has amassed wealth and properties in the name of his 2 sons-in-laws and his brother, which are 50 times his legal income. But unfortunately, the government has done nothing in the matter, because it is only the government which can move to remove him. But it suits the government to have such a corrupt person in charge of the Human Rights Commission, because he will just toe their line. So we need to fix the system of appointment of human rights commissions. We need to sign the International Criminal Court Treaty, which is an international treaty which would allow persons like Mr. Kamal Nath, Sajjan Kumar, etc., who are not being brought to book within the Indian system, to be tried in the International Criminal Court for their heinous acts. But unfortunately, India is not signing that treaty either. So what we are seeing in India is it's a man-made catastrophe which is unfolding. It's not that it can't be fixed. All this can be fixed. We can make our institutions work by reforming them. Our anti-corruption system, our courts, our human rights commissions, etc., they need to be made to work by fixing the deficiencies in the system. And most of the deficiencies are that they are not independent of the government. We need to make them independent, truly independent of the government. But as I said, unfortunately, the government is not willing, and has dug its heels in and is preventing any reform from taking place. The silver lining in the cloud is that there is a very vibrant civil society movement, or several very, very important civil society movements across the country going on today, which are fighting against all these injustices, which are campaigning for reforms. And these movements, particularly this anti-corruption movement, which is fighting for an independent ombudsman, has got enormous, unprecedented public support from the people. But as I said, ultimately, the ball seems to stop with the people who are in government, because they say that, look, we are in government, we will decide what kind of reforms are to be made or not to be made. And you can't, you are nobody. Even if tens of millions of people come out on the streets in support of the Jan Lokpal bill, even if every survey opinion poll that has ever been conducted in India is showing that 80% of the people in the country support the Jan Lokpal bill, the government is still not willing, or those in parliament are still not willing to bring that kind of law. So it needs a greater push, or it will need some kind of electoral revolution in the country which will sweep out the existing ruling party and even the other mainstream political parties, and bring in place a completely new political force in the country which is wedded to these kind of reforms. How will that happen? Whether it will happen, nobody can say as yet. But it will require enormous effort on the part of all thinking citizens in the country and abroad, who are concerned about what is happening, the manner in which the socio-economic rights and the civil and political rights of the vast majority of the people are being violated with impunity in the country today. The Sikh community of Canada in particular has shown enormous, not just resolve, enormous fortitude, enormous courage in braving all kinds of odds to make it good in this country. It has fought every way for its rights and has succeeded step by step. It, it shows, I have, for the last several days, I have been interacting with a large number of activists and members of the World Sikh Organization. I was just remarking that we don't have an organization even in India, a human rights organization even in India, which has this many such dedicated and committed activists and volunteers. It's quite remarkable. It shows something in the blood of the Sikh community. And if this community were to just devote a little more time and energy to what is happening in India and put its will and its strength to try and address those issues, I think it can make a significant contribution. The WSO has set up, along with the Human Rights Law Network, the Jaswant Singh Khalra Center for defending human rights defenders who are now being attacked by the government. I think it's a great initiative. I just hope and wish and request all of you that all of you, it is the duty of everybody who considers India to be his original motherland in particular, to engage with what's going on in India, to see what's going on, to understand what's going on there, to form alliances and bridges with human rights organizations working in India to remedy and redress the situation. Not just human rights organizations, the other anti-corruption organizations which are working towards these reforms, and help them. The community here can also help in terms of the kind of trade that takes place between Canada and India. One of the major issues in India today involving human rights is that of nuclear energy plants, nuclear power plants which the government of India seems determined to set up and expand across the country because of the fact that they pose all kinds of safety hazards. There is a problem of accidents, there is a problem of storage of spent fuel, there is a problem of the risk of theft of nuclear fuel, apart from the fact that it's the most expensive kind of energy to produce. There are very strong resistance movements which have built up across the country wherever there are proposals to set up nuclear power plants or wherever such plants are being set up. Now, Canada is one country which perhaps wants to compete in this market for nuclear power plants, for exporting nuclear power plants to India. So the Sikh community or the Indian community here can certainly play a significant role in trying to stop these kinds of exports of asbestos. For example, asbestos is banned here, but it is being exported to India. So all these hazardous exports, and in trying to put pressure on the Indian government to bring this kind of Lokpal bill, which will create a truly independent ombudsman. Why should these 15 ministers who have been charged with serious acts of corruption, why should they be given any visas to come to Canada at all? Until and unless they allow themselves to be subjected to an independent investigation. We have said that here are 6 retired judges of the Supreme Court, even in the absence of the Lokpal, let the government choose any 3. These are judges about whose independence and whose integrity nobody has any doubt. Let a special investigating team be appointed under those 3 judges and let them investigate these charges of corruption. But till such time that the government agrees to set up this independent SIT, why should those 15 ministers who are facing serious and credible charges of corruption, why should they be given any visas to visit Canada? Just as Narendra Modi has been denied a visa, these 15 ministers, including the Prime Minister of the country, should be denied a visa to come to Canada. This is also an important campaign that the Indian community here can become part of. So there are many things that the Indian community here can do to redress and improve the human rights situation in India. It is not merely a question of India being your original motherland and having friends and relatives in India. It is also a fact that if human rights violations on this enormous scale are taking place in a large country like India, and if other people do not do anything or whatever is within their power to remedy that situation, ultimately this will come to affect them as well, because it will lead to civil war in India, it will lead to all kinds of violence in India, and eventually this violence will come to be even exported out of India. So that is why human rights are universal. It is only when we can ensure, or we strive to ensure, that we live in a just society everywhere, that there is justice and respect for human rights everywhere, that even we can live with a clear conscience and in peace in this country. Thank you very much.